Okay, welcome to class. As you guys know, I'm at drill today, so we're going to do this over video. Your focus question of the day is what made the English settlement of New England distinctive? One of the favorite questions of the College Board for the AP test is to ask you to compare and contrast Virginia and New England. So yesterday, and before that a bit, we were talking about Jamestown, that's Virginia. So keep in mind as we're going through this, how New England is different. There are some similarities, but there are a lot of differences. So keep this in mind. Okay, so what is Puritanism? I think you guys probably know from the reading that Puritans want to purify the Anglican Church. Remember, Henry VIII had created this church so that he could get a divorce, but he didn't change much, right? He kept a lot of the ceremonies of the Catholic Church. He kept priests and he kept bishops, and this was not okay with the Puritans. The Puritans were Calvinists, so they believed that, or really I should say Protestants, sort of in a truer sense, right? They believe you should be able to read the Bible for yourself, that you should be able to interpret Scripture for yourself, and that in order to access God, you should go to the Bible and not to an Anglican bishop or priest. So the Puritans, again, want to purify the Church of England. This gets confusing because we talk about the Puritans and we talk about the Pilgrims, okay? What you have to understand is that the Pilgrims are Puritans. They're just separatist Puritans, meaning the Pilgrims, right? The guys who go on the Mayflower in 1620, first Thanksgiving, all of that. They're Puritans, but they don't think the Anglican Church can be saved, right? They want to start something entirely different. Now, when we say the Puritans, which again, I know this is confusing because the Pilgrims are Puritans, but typically when we reference the Puritans, we mean John Winthrop, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and we're talking about Puritans that think they can save the Anglican Church. So they want to purify it from within. Okay, let's talk about moral liberty. So, and natural liberty. So the Puritans believed there were two types of liberty, right? One moral, one natural. Natural liberty, they said, was actually wrong, right? There was no freedom to do something bad, right? And they oppose this to their moral liberty, which is a liberty to only do good. So for the Puritans, and I'll read from the book there, it was quite compatible, this moral liberty, with severe restraints on speech, religion, and personal behavior, right? True freedom, according to Winthrop, depended on subjection to authority, both religious and secular. So the Puritans believe if you have too much natural liberty, right, anarchy will ensue. The state will break down. You will get violence and chaos. So they believe in liberty, but really only liberty to do what they would say is right. Okay. All right, here we have a primary source. We see the first book printed in the English colonies, obviously made by a printing press. I guess just looking at it, this reminds me just to mention of sort of the rise of formalized education and learning in America. You should know from the reading that Harvard was founded by the Puritans, and education was incredibly important to the Puritans, even for Puritan women, because they believed, again, that everyone should be able to translate the scriptures for themselves. Okay, John Winthrop, there he is. I'm going to mention him a lot this year. He's incredibly important. He is famous for mentioning the city on a hill, right? And we will read this on Monday. But for Winthrop, for the Puritans, they are going to establish a society that's going to be a model for the rest of the world. They want to be a light upon a hill that will serve as an example for how everyone else should behave. This is really where we can trace the roots of American exceptionalism, right? We as Americans typically, though this is changing, typically believe that there is something special about us, about our republic, about our democracy, about our society, and about how we act and behave in the world. This is where all of that starts. Okay, so the Pilgrims, again, separatist Puritans, they're going to go to Plymouth, right? Plymouth Rock. This is what you guys learned in elementary school in 1620. This was actually a pretty radical group, okay? It was very small. These were not mainstream Puritans. They had actually left England more than a decade before. They went to the Netherlands because there was more religious toleration there, but they didn't like it. Their young people, their children started learning Dutch and started losing the, I guess, part of their cultural identity. Parents did not like this. So their goal was to transport English culture to the New World, but to have the liberty to govern themselves and worship in the manner that they thought was the best. They actually were supposed to go to Virginia, and they tried to go to Virginia. Side note here, John Smith actually he sort of begged them to be their leader, but they didn't trust him. They thought he was too secular. They thought he would not listen to their sort of religious needs. And he had made these maps of the New World, and they basically said, "Hey, John, like, why would we hire you? We have your maps. That's really all we need. Thank you." So John Smith was not too happy about that. So there's this. It's a big to-do, right? Them leaving Europe to go to the New World. They get scammed. They buy 2 ships. One of the ships they buy is like leaky and damaged, and the person that sold it hid that. So they're sailing by England, and they literally have to abandon one of their ships, which is why they just end up on the Mayflower. A lot of the people that wanted to go for the first round couldn't make it. Interestingly enough, though, they're not totally free here, right? There are investors behind this enterprise that are very interested in making money from the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims actually have to work for investors in England, and I don't think they ever get them a profit, but they're not totally unbeholden. So they show up, they land at Cape Cod, and they really do make a good effort to sail further south, right? They know where they are. They've got pretty good maps, as I've said. But there's this really treacherous area between Cape Cod and Virginia. The winds are really bad. There's a lot of places to beach a craft. And basically their captain said, no, we're not going through there. I'll put you ashore here. And so they sailed round, found Plymouth, and that's how they ended up in Massachusetts. I will say, if you don't understand the geography that I'm talking about at this point, you need to. So understand where Virginia is, where Massachusetts is. Massachusetts is farther north, if you didn't know. So they get there, and they land among the Wampanoag Indians. And of course, as you guys read, the Wampanoags have been devastated by disease. Horrible smallpox. And so they literally find, fields ready to be planted. They find quite a bit of food. and they find one Native American named Squanto who is going to be really, really beneficial for their settlement. Okay, so they arrive. They're not very well prepared. They got a very, very late start, and they land right before winter. Uh, so we're sort of, as historians here, we're expecting a disaster when we hear that they land right before winter. In fact, it really is a disaster. Half of them do not survive the first winter, but it really is a miracle that they survive. So Squanto shows up and helps them, and his story is quite bizarre. So he was captured. He was lured aboard a Spanish ship as a slave, which is a common practice. Went to Spain. A priest saved him from slavery. He winds up in London and he learns English. Excuse me. And then he makes his way back to the New World. He finally makes his way, right? I can't remember how long he's gone. It's something like 10 years. Makes his way back to the New World, finally makes his way back to his village, and almost everyone is dead. Of course, quite shocking for him. But for the pilgrims, it's sort of a miracle, right? Squanto walks out of the woods and he speaks English. So it's very easy for him to teach them to fish and teach them to hunt in the New World and how to plant crops. It's largely because of Squanto that they survive. So Massasoit, who is the chief in the region, at one point he has, and by the way, I'm getting all this information from Nathaniel Philbrick's book on the Mayflower, which is quite fantastic. You can probably look up at my bookshelf and see it right now. Anyway, Massasoit, after a while, decides he's going to kill all of the pilgrims. So him and his warriors come to Plymouth. It's very, very rudimentary at this point. And Squanto convinces Massasoit that the pilgrims have the ability to unleash smallpox on demand. So the English, the pilgrims are acting sort of suspiciously. They're guarding something. What they're actually guarding is their gunpowder. But Squanto convinces Massasoit that they're actually guarding smallpox, and that if Massasoit tries anything, they will unleash smallpox and kill all of the Native Americans. Now, we have to ask ourselves why Squanto did this, and to understand that we would really have to get into complicated political relations in that Wampanoag society. But ultimately, Squanto is trying to become a great chief himself, and he's trying to use the English to achieve that status. Ironically, right, we have these really, really religious pilgrims. Ironically, Squanto was a devil worshiper, and that was rare for the Wampanoags, right? He was actually, in fact, his name in that language meant Satan. So he was a devil worshiper, working with these very religious pilgrims, but it certainly worked out in the pilgrims' favor. Okay, so about 9 years later, after the pilgrims, and again, the pilgrims are going to establish Plymouth Plantation or Plymouth Colony. It is tiny. And then this wave of migration comes. And then all of the Puritans start coming, the ones that are with John Winthrop and the ones that are not separatist. So the Great Migration, by 1642, some 21,000 Puritans had immigrated to Massachusetts. They're going to set up shop at Boston. They're going to create Boston. They're going to quickly dwarf the smaller Plymouth colony. And they're going to create quite an interesting society. Okay, so here another primary source. Take some time, look at this in your book. You see English explorers, and Wampanoag Indians. I mean, this is still the Columbian Exchange, and if that is a term that you're unfamiliar with, you definitely should be familiar with it. Okay. Okay, so the Puritan family, as you guys know, highly hierarchical. It was patriarchy, just like almost everywhere else. Though women did have a little bit more empowerment due to the focus on reading. Okay, so women would be educated so that they could um, read the Bible. For government, initially the 8 investors were controlling things, and then they had this legislative body where landowners, church members would elect people to represent them. Of course, this is sowing the seeds for later American society. The church and the state was profoundly interconnected in New England. They tried to sort of say it was separate, but they're very, very similar. Understand that a lot of the governing is done on the local level, right? These villages have their own congregation. They call themselves Congregationalists. Those little churches or meeting houses have a lot of autonomy to make decisions to sort of govern how they live, as long as they don't take any step outside of Puritan thought. Okay, for sake of time, this. There is Harvard College. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. I know it says you guys are supposed to read some primary sources this weekend. We're probably just going to read them in class together on Monday. So just do the regular homework. And as I'm looking at my notes here, I just want to sort of mention one last thing that, again, not much religious toleration in New England. So yeah, we'll stop it there. For the rest of the class, you should work on your caricatures. You have a number of them due pretty soon here. You can start getting ready for your next test. You could just study because you guys have a lot of studying to do, or you could start the homework. All right, have a great day.